Happy birthday, PowerCLI!
I'm Jake Robinson, the product manager for PowerCLI, and on behalf of all of us here, including the development team for PowerCLI in Sofia, Bulgaria, we want to thank the community for the last 10 years, and we're looking forward to the next 10 years. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Howdy, this is Jeffrey Snover. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you there in Barcelona to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of PowerCLI. It has been a fantastic 10 years. I think the partnership between VMware and Microsoft on PowerCLI has been fantastic, sort of unprecedented success. People have been very successful with it. Superstar Luke Deakins, Microsoft PowerShell MVP. Boy, does that say it all. Anyway, so it's been a great 10 years, but I got to tell you, I think it's just starting. I think the next 10 years are going to be even better by a whole lot. Why? Because, frankly, based upon feedback we've been getting for about 10 years from my buddies at VMware, we finally are porting PowerShell to Linux. That's right. And so what that means is now you will be able to manage any server you want, Windows or Linux, from any client you want, Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. So again, wherever you are, you can use it to manage everything. So the skills that you've made investing in learning PowerShell and PowerCLI will be able to be leveraged everywhere. So it's going to be another great 10 years. Have a great VMworld conference. And again, congratulations and happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Happy birthday, PowerCLI. I can't believe it's been 10 years already. Thanks for everything that you've done for the VMware community and our customers. You've allowed us to automate everything within the VMware SDDC, and we thank you for that. I hope you enjoy this special day with all of your closest friends at VMworld. See you later from Virtually Ghetto.
Hey guys, just on my way to the airport to fly to Las Vegas for VMworld, but there's one thing I still needed to do, and that was congratulate all of you with the 10-year anniversary of PowerCLI. Thanks for all the hard work you guys put in, and thanks for making PowerCLI into what it is today, because without the community, it wouldn't have been possible. Thanks, and again, congratulations.
Hi guys, this is Frank. I can't believe it's already the 10th birthday of PowerCLI. What I do remember is a PowerCLI man running through the house like it was yesterday. So Alan and Luke, have a blast presenting this 10th birthday session of PowerCLI. Have fun, guys.
Hello, this is a message from my favorite Belgian, Mr. Luke Deakins, and my favorite Frenchman, Mr. Alain Reneuf. Congratulations to you both, and congratulations to PowerCLI on your 10th birthday. See you all at VMworld.
Ah, PowerCLI, 10 years old. I remember when you first came into the world, you were a tiny little shell that allowed us to manage small amounts of our virtualization infrastructure. But now, you're a big kid. You can basically allow us to manage everything, which is pretty exciting. All kidding aside, it's been amazing over the last 10 years, all the things that we've been able to do with PowerCLI, the impact that it's had on my life, and the work that we've done in the data centers. In fact, without PowerCLI, I wouldn't have this little guy. It's a crowd pleaser. Anyway, happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Hey everyone, this is Eric Sloven. Back in 2007, I was one of the very first PowerCLI users, and I want to wish PowerCLI a very happy 10th birthday.
Okay, something's wrong. Oh well. He goes on.
Hey guys, from a place called Venlo in Denmark. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
I've just got back from somebody who nearly used the UI. That was a close one. Happy birthday, PowerCLI.
Happy birthday.
Yay!
Happy birthday.
Yay!
Thank you very much. The reason I started with that video is
First of all, William's daughter is ever so cute. That last video is amazing. But the reason I really started with that video is because today's session is about PowerCLI's 10th birthday, and we wouldn't be here today without community members like these people on the screen, and without community members like you. This is why we're here today, and this is why Luke and I have been presenting for a long time on PowerCLI, and we come back every single year and we get deeper and deeper because you guys are learning more and more about PowerCLI. So we want to put some emphasis on that community today in our talk. But first of all, I want to apologize to you all. Now I'm with my friends, my CLI friends. Today, you saw me on stage using the UI. I'm sorry about that. It was in the keynote, I couldn't do much. Pat asked me to. So, just between us, I'm sorry for doing that. And I promise you from now on, it's CLI only, okay? So, of course, the first slide we're going to take you through is the disclaimer. It's important for you to realize the information within this disclaimer and know that what we're going to be talking today may include forward-looking statements, but clearly you need to be aware of the information that's in the disclaimer, and anything we say cannot be held against us in a court of law. So again, we're going to be talking about PowerCLI's 10th birthday. I mean, 10 years. Who can believe that PowerCLI has been around for 10 years now? That's pretty fantastic, right? I mean, it started off small, but we're now at a point where we can manage most of our infrastructure using PowerCLI. And I know you're all aware of that because you're all in this room for this session and this deep dive session. We're going to take you through some things today. We're going to take you through the beginnings of PowerCLI, talk to you about where it came from and actually where it is now. We're going to talk you through some of the scripts and actually go back through those, because I know it's not just about the CLI that's changing, it's about us as well. We're changing. I know personally that when I bring up a script, if I look at it and I wrote it a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I sit there and first of all I go, okay, what the hell was I doing here? And then second of all, I go, why did I do it that way? I could have done it this much easier, Ray, because my knowledge is growing as well. So we're going to revisit a few of those scripts that are out there in the community and update them with things that we've learned and update them with new things from the product as well. We're going to go into a little bit more a deeper dive. We know you guys love that stuff and eat it up every single year and ask us for more. So we're going to go into some of the deeper dive stuff, so stay with us while we do that. And then we're going to talk about how PowerCLI has just started. You think the first 10 years were great? You wait for the next 10 years. So I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Luke Deakins, the man who needs no introduction, mainly because you've all been in these sessions probably the previous 2 or 3 years. If you've ever been to the communities and logged a call, a ticket or a problem, you'll know that it's normally Luke that answers that question, and pretty damn fast as well. He's a superstar in the community and answers a lot of questions. He certainly answered a lot of mine. He's a PowerShell MVP, as Jeffrey reminded us. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And he has a personal blog, which I have bookmarked myself. It's luked.info. I visit there on a daily basis. He's lacking in information recently, not as much as me personally, but come on, Luke, let's get these blog posts out, please. And he's available on Twitter at LukeD22.
Okay. Good afternoon from me as well. I'm glad to see that so many people are willing to share this 10th birthday session with me, with Alan and me. Alan, of course, after this morning's keynote, needs no introduction anymore. He's the VR guy, the CLI guy who sometimes uses a UI. But seriously, he has a great personal blog. It hasn't been that active anymore the last couple of months, but you understand why after this morning's keynote. Yeah. There's still a lot of useful information on there, and it's standard. And don't forget, on his blog, he also mentions this big script that everybody should or is using is vcheck. Who is using vcheck in this room? See, Alan, you still have a lot of fans in this house.
Thank you.
You can find him on the VMTN website, and you especially can find him on Twitter. I think he responds to most of the tweets you send his way. And there's a few things that we will show later on. There are now other ways of interacting with the PowerCLI people from VMware, but we'll come to that. early beginnings. So we are doing this 10th year, and this is a screenshot from a snap-in, which I reinstalled a month ago, and it still worked, provided I installed a Windows XP machine. That's an early beta. I don't even think it was ever intended to go public, even not within the beta group that at that time was participating. As you can see, there were the total of 8 commandlets. And at that time it was called VI Toolkit. It became PowerCLI later on. There were 8 commandlets available. That's where it all started, and it went to a smashing 616 commandlets in the current release. This tries to show you the evolution, the history of PowerCLI. So there's a few types of information. At the bottom, what you see there is the name changes that have been happening over the years, over the different versions. It started out, as I said, as VMware Infrastructure Toolkit. At some point, release 4, yes. At release 4, it became vSphere PowerCLI, but then it became bigger and bigger, supporting much more components, and it ultimately became VMware PowerCLI. So you see the major versions that appeared and approximately their timing when they were published. What you see on the right in this lightly colored box, that's when they went on the PowerShell gallery. So there's no MSI anymore. You can just find module, install module, or update module if you already had a previous version installed. So they've come quite a long way. Even if you look at the beginning, PowerShell version 1 only was released in November 2006, and only a small year later they already had the first beta of PowerCLI, or as it was called, the VI Toolkit.
So if we dig down into that a little bit more, what we can see is the actual modules that we started including in those releases as well. So again, at the top, you can see the list of version numbers that came out. And then you can see why we started to expand the Virtual Infrastructure Toolkit into PowerCLI and started covering things like the storage module, the VDS module, the cloud module, the license module, image builder, auto deploy. And then the core module's always been there. And then you can take a look at why we renamed it to VMware PowerCLI. You can see we're actually going outside of the core vSphere environment and actually including things like the Horizon View module and things that allow you to manage more than just core vSphere. And the reason that we renamed it was because clearly what we want to do is make this the one CLI that rules all of the VMware products in the future. The other interesting part of this slide is the numbers at the top, if I can get this to work.
Red.
Okay, so we can see the numbers of commandlets that are starting to introduce, and you can see how this product has just got bigger and bigger with every single release. And the reason it's done that is because we keep getting feedback from you guys and you ladies, finding the information that we're no longer covering or we need to cover. And that's why we extend it every single release, to make sure that we're giving you the commands that you need to do your day-to-day job and automate the features that you want to automate.
This is an historic document, in fact. What you see here on the right is an extract from a session that was given in 2007 by a guy called Antonio Diaz, who started the VI Toolkit, the coding at least. This was a session where they the first time mentioned the use of PowerShell in a vSphere environment. You see the first commandlets that he showed on these slides. There's the get VM. What he's doing actually, and that's something that we can still do nowadays and often do, you take the VMs, change the network adapter, map it to another port group. It's quite straightforward. And what the big advantage was, what he stressed at that point, is that you can do this for multiple servers by using the pipeline. So you go out in your environment, connect to multiple servers, and then just get all the VMs on those servers and change that in one line, the port group for all these VMs. So that was a very new thing that he announced at VMworld 2007. This is another historical document, and it's still online. If you go to the VMware PowerCLI blog and you scroll back all the way back, this is the first blog entry that you will find on there. You can see that because there is no previous post. There's one on the right, the next post, but there's no previous post. This is the first one, and it recaptures a bit what he told during that VMworld session. So again, you will see him changing the port group of a number of VMs in there. So you can still visit that one and see.
So we've gone through a little bit of the history, but I know as I've been talking to you throughout the conference, there are still people that are like, you know, great, but I haven't caught up to date with the last releases yet because you guys are releasing them really fast now. I don't actually know what's new. So starting all the way back from the beginning when we had those initial commandlets up until now, I just want to bring you up to date with those new features real quick. And these are the features that have been brought out in 6.5, 6.5.1, and 6.5.2. No particular order here, just some of the interesting features. You know, clearly we've spoken about that rename of the product and about moving it away from vSphere PowerCLI into VMware PowerCLI, making sure that we cover more of the VMware products now and in the future as well. We, of course, had a large amount of work to do to get away from snap-ins. You've probably seen us do that over the last 3 or 4 releases. And now we're actually at the point where all of the commandlets that are in there are shipped using modules. And that gives us the great ability, as Luke said earlier, to be able to deploy PowerShell and be able to deploy PowerCLI and even the latest version from the PowerShell gallery with a single line of code. We can now do an install module, tell it to install PowerCLI, and it will just drag it down onto any machine that has PowerShell installed. No more messing around with MSI files. It's a really great feature. We also have added some new commands that allow you to do cross vCenter vMotion as well. So we updated actually the move VM command to allow you to not only move between hosts, but also move between virtual centers as well. We added a lot of new commandlets to allow you to work with virtual SAN. I know a lot of you have been looking at vSAN and have been implementing vSAN, and now you can actually automate the life cycle of vSAN and all of the configuration using PowerCLI. We added some independent disk management commandlets so that you can actually work with the disks of a virtual machine without actually having the virtual machine objects themselves. So you can work with them as independent disks on their own. We added vVol commandlets. We also added a brand new module that allows you to work with VMware Horizon View. This was one of those things where I know I would stand in front of you at some of my previous sessions at the end and I would say, okay, it's time for Q&A. What are we not covering? What feedback do you have? I guarantee you, somebody used to put their hand up and say, what about Horizon View? You know, those commandlets don't really work that well, the ones that are installed on the Horizon View server, and you can only use them on that server. When are you going to sort that mess out? Well, this is the first step of actually sorting that out. These commandlets are now available to run through any version of PowerCLI, from any server that has PowerCLI installed on it. So it doesn't have to be the Horizon View server itself. And you can access Horizon View. You can actually access 100% of the API for Horizon View. We also added commandlets for allowing you to work with DRS cluster groups. This was actually a great example of some community scripts that we saw written by Luke Deakins and Matt Boren. They wrote some great scripts that allow you to work with the affinity and anti-affinity groups. So we realized, you know, that's actually a gap in our product. We should really be covering that. So of course we went back through and we created those commandlets and made them available in a supported way for everybody to be able to use. We added more storage policy-based management commandlets, and we added commandlets to start working with the content library. So start doing some of the basic stuff that's in content library, like deploying a virtual machine from a content library, or attaching a new CD-ROM from an ISO in the content library. You can see the enhancements that we've made are based around the community feedback that we get back. So I want to thank you for this list of enhancements and keeping us going and producing the product that you want.
Okay. Alan mentioned on several occasions the community, and the community has been quite important in the past 10 years, and it will continue to be quite important because the success and the power and the scripts that are available all come from this community. So what we decided is we wanted to have a small look at how this community evolved over those 10 years. There's a bit of data here. It started out when the beta started in 2007. It was a closed community at that time, so only the people who subscribed to the beta were able to access. Then when they released the first official version on March 11th, 2008, that became an open, a public community on the VMTN website. It was renamed a couple of times, so currently it's called VMware PowerCLI, corresponding with the name of the product itself. And like we said, it's a very active community, and it became, because automation became more and more popular in the last 10 years. And what we had here is we had a product PowerCLI based on PowerShell. So all these Windows admins who were left out in the cold, because they are not Perl specialists like some people in the room, they now had finally a tool where they could do similar things that these Perl people were doing before, thanks to PowerShell and PowerCLI on top of it. What we tried to do here is we tried, instead of giving long lists of slides with data, we tried to capture a bit of the information extracted from the community in a kind of infographics. And what we looked at the data of the the PowerCLI community between December 22nd, 2007 and end of August this year. So there's a lot of interesting information to be found in that community. So the thread rate, what we see, thread, that is a question. Somebody raises a thread, that's opening a question on the community. There's an average of 3.2 per day over those 10 years that we have been having that community, 9 years to be exact. If we take out the business, the Sundays and the Saturdays, it even increases a bit. We arrive at 4.2 threads on a business day. In the graph below there, or the box below there, we see that there has been a total, at the moment being August 22nd, of 11,294 threads or questions in there. But what is even more amazing, if we look on the yellow figure there have been 5,591 threads that are marked as answered. So that means the person who raised the question got an answer from somebody in the community, and he considered that a valid answer. That gives us an answer rate of nearly 50%, which is quite amazing. I don't think there's a lot of other communities that reach this high success rate in their threads. Other interesting fact, there have been 4,399 people raising threads, individual people. So there are, of course, people who raise more than one thread, but we have 4,399 individuals. And what is even more amazing, we have more people who answer to threads. So we have 5,141 people who actually once posted a reply to one of these questions. So the contribution in that community is quite high, as we can see from this summary here.
So digging into those details a little bit more, we can see that the average answer time is a reasonable 2.4 days, which means that if you're asking a question, you're getting a response pretty quick. We can see the shortest response time is 59 seconds, so even quicker, and the longest response time, personally, I don't know where Luke was at the time, but 1,009 days.
That was my holiday.
That's a long holiday. We can see that the most replies to a thread ever was 166 replies. So, you know, that's quite an interesting thread in itself. Having a look at that and seeing why there were 166 responses to it would be interesting for us as a product team, definitely. And the most views is 94,303. So that is definitely an interesting post. Certainly something we should get our technical marketing guy to look at. Clearly some valuable information in there for us to put out to the community and make sure that people are understanding what's in there. Now the top creator, the VMinator, he's created 215 posts and asked questions 215 times. Are you in the room? Okay. I had a getting started in PowerCLI book for you if you were in the room. You know, try and limit the number of posts going on there. And the top replier, I've left that one blank. Any ideas? We all know, don't we? Who could that possibly be? Any ideas, Luke?
You did quite a bit of replies way back now.
Come on, seriously. Of course, Mr. Luke Deacon. So 19,663, which just proves that this guy does not sleep, let alone eat, or take holidays.
Or knows how to do automation.
He probably has hit 20,000 while we've been in here. He's probably answering some right now. So Luke, do you want to take us through some of these stats?
Yeah. So while we were collecting these data, there were some interesting graphs to be drawn here. The first one is a rather classical one. We look at the number of threads per year since PowerCLI came into being. What we see is a peak between 2010 and 2012. There were a lot of new features. If we could scroll back to the number of commandlets that were inside PowerCLI, we see that they had a dramatic increase at that point. So there were a lot more questions in those 3-4 years when those new commandlets were added. We see a decrease in the last years, but what we see, and that's something that I can't show in a graph, is that the questions become much more advanced, much more technical. It's not how do I find the name of a VM anymore. Those we had at the first 2 years. Now we actually see things like, how can I get rid of UAC when I'm deploying a machine and want to change the disk size inside the Windows guest OS? I mean, it's a lot more advanced than what we saw in those first years. So I think the decrease in number of questions, we should be able to measure at some point the technical level of the questions, but that's hard to do in a bar chart like this. What is also interesting is the average threads per day that we have seen over those 10 years. Okay, obviously Sundays and Saturdays people don't actually do a lot of work or have questions in any case. Monday, classical Monday effect, it's a bit less than the rest of the week because yeah, who comes happy into work on a Monday morning, so they only start at around noon, so it's a bit less. Then we have the peak of the week, the normal 3 days, and on a Friday people are already unwinding for the weekend that is coming. By accident, this chart exactly maps to a chart of a productivity that most of your managers will be using. This, if you look at any study on productivity in a working place, it exactly corresponds with this kind of graph on the right here. So nothing new here. This is an interesting one. To start with, this is per hour of the day, how many activity threads that we see in there. To start with, this is based on UTC. So I'm in the UTC time zone. What you see here is we begin at that point at midnight UTC. It's most specifically, I think it's Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and parts of the West Coast that are still awake. So there's activity there. We see activity all day long. But what starts to become interesting is when the Western world, Europe, and we see the small increase here. So that's the Middle East that is waking up. Europe is waking up. Now Europe is going for lunch, so it's a bit less. And then we see the West Coast the East Coast starting to wake up. So we see the accumulation of what is happening in Europe and the East Coast in the States. We see a small rise here again. That's when the early people on the West Coast start their work and have questions, and then it goes down. So that means once the East Coast is gone, on the West Coast they fall back to the normal ratio that we would see in New Zealand, Australia, and Southeast Asia. So that's the minimum level, in fact, that we see, because there's a lot of water between the West Coast and when we look at Australia and New Zealand. Another flavor of that same data, where we did this, the threads per month per year. So what is interesting on this chart here is that, okay, first month of the year, New Year's resolution, people are eager, I'm going to improve my knowledge of PowerCLI, I have a lot of questions. Then it starts to go down a bit, so that's Easter time nearly, people get settled in, or they got an answer in the first 3 months. Then we see the holiday season starting here, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, so we see a lot of less activity. July, August, people are starting to come back. And then what you see over here on the right, people are preparing for the end of year, Christmas, New Year, and whatever parties you have around that time of the year. What is always interesting is if you look for a certain keyword in Google and see how many hits you get back from that. So if you look on PowerCLI, it's an impressive number that we get back here. So that's more than 400,000 hits that we have in Google just on the keyword PowerCLI. So I was very curious, if I now combine PowerCLI with a number of other keywords, what would the results be? So obviously, I did that with my co-presenter names. I put virtual L in there. And okay, quite impressive. I have 257,000 hits on that combination of those keywords. So normally I don't Google myself, but okay, in this case, why not give it a shot? And I did this. And I was immediately depressed. My wife saw it. Why don't you eat your steak? Normally you like your steak. And so, yeah. But then, while I was eating my steak, after all, I realized that Google has a funny algorithm for searching words. So if you put a dash in there, if you put a dash in a word, he ignores it. But you can override this by putting it between quotes. And needless to say, my wife immediately saw that things was so. I ordered an extra steak for that evening, and I was very happy in that. I can imagine that Alan had a steak less in that week when I told him.
Actually, I think we should just end the slide there and like take your photos now, okay? Because we're going to quickly skip through that. There we go.
Okay. A session that we normally do at VMworld wouldn't be a session without some deep dives. So we had a lot of data. We discovered, Alan described a bit what is in the new version available, how it was expanded. So now we're going to go into a couple of scripts. There was this script, one of the first ones I published on my blog, where you could find orphaned VMs in your environment. So what it does is, it goes out to your data stores, finds all the VMX files on there, then checks if there is a registered VM corresponding with that VMX file. So quite easy, quite straightforward. I had a lot of downloads on that script. But there is something available that you can use HTTP access to those data stores. So you compose a specific URL, and then you can get information of all the files in your environment. I knew that the method, the API method I used, and even the data store PS drive is quite slow at times. So I was wondering if this thing would be a bit faster than the method I used before. And we have a small demo on that. So this is my home lab, where I set up a small environment. I have a clock running at the top right, PowerShell script, of course, and I now go to my new version of the VMX Raiders function that I created. I'm switching to my environment. I need to have some orphaned machines. So I'm going to look at all data stores under a specific data store cluster. I have a number of VMs on there. And what I'm going to do now is remove some of those VMs. So when I run this now, before I remove them, I will see that he finds 0 orphaned VMs, which is normal. Everything is registered in vCenter, all is good. Next step is we unregister a couple of VMs. And I know I could have done this from the command line, but if people are allowed to use a UI at a keynote, I suppose I'm allowed to use a UI for this. So now we run it again. By the way, this is in Visual Studio Code, an editor you absolutely should check out. And we see that he found 2 orphaned VMs in there, which are in fact just the 2 VMs that I removed a second ago. So this is again the logic. As I said before, we look at all the VMX files, compare them with the registered VMs, and if there are more VMX files than registered VMs, we have orphaned files. What it's based upon is not the search subfolder method anymore, but I'm using a standard, okay, we'll get there, get HTTP data store item over here. So we're actually using a standard, here it is, a standard URL to access the content of that data store. And I'm using the standard PowerShell commandlet invoke web request to query via that URL the content of that data store. So that was a bit faster than what I had in my previous one. It's not dramatic, so I will still be using my old method as well, but this is a valid method. I think it's especially a lot faster if you go to data stores with a lot of VMs on there. Okay, this is again a recap of the code, because they will publish these slides and you won't see the videos, of course, so you can always fall back and see at least what we're doing here.
Okay, so while I've been talking at VMworld, I've not only been talking about UIs and CLIs, I've also been talking about the APIs. In fact, my role at the moment is the product line manager for APIs, SDKs, and CLIs. So we've made it quite clear that we're moving away from the SOAP API. The SOAP API will still exist. Clearly there's a lot of integration and a lot of great work that uses that SOAP API, like PowerCLI itself. But when we move to that new REST API, what does that actually mean for you? What does that mean for the PowerCLI people in the room, or the people that want to use this API? What I wanted to do is actually just tell you a little bit more about those APIs and tell you that the reason we are modernizing these APIs is not just to convert from SOAP to REST, but also to make these super easy to use as well, to modernize the interfaces that we're using to work with vSphere. I know if you've ever looked at the API reference before, it's not always the easiest thing to read, right? I mean, I know Luke can probably recite it word for word right now if we asked him to, but personally, when I open that API reference, I know I find it hard to navigate and find exactly the information I'm looking for. So we want to make that a lot easier, and we want to also modernize our APIs along the way as well. So I'm going to take you through a demonstration of how we can use these new APIs through PowerCLI, and also give you a little bit more information about the API, the REST API, as we go along as well. So what you can see on the screen right here is the new API Explorer that's available. In fact, I'm on my virtual center IP address /API Explorer in 6.5, and we have access to the appliance, the content library, and all the other APIs in Virtual Center. You can see I'm attached, I'm logged in at the top as the administrator account, and this API Explorer is actually a great way for us to browse these APIs and actually start working with them live on the box. For example, I've gone down to the VM. Within there, I can see that we have a get on /vCenter VM, we have a post, and we have a delete. If we were to run the get, it would indeed just get us a list of the virtual machines within this API, and it would give us some more information about those as well. We can filter those very easily on things like the power state, or the hosts, or their name, or which cluster they're in, or the data centers, or the resource pools, all stuff that's fairly easy in PowerCLI, but now is super easy in our API as well. Within the API Explorer, we can even try this out as well. So this is a great way for you to learn more about the new REST API in Virtual Center. We can instantly return a nice JSON body that is easily usable within PowerCLI that returns that information. So what about when we want to use that through PowerShell and PowerCLI, right? We know that there are standard commands out there already for working with PowerShell. Luke just showed us that. Invoke web request calls a REST server, any REST server, and returns the information. You can see here we could use this command if we wanted to. We could form our header authentication. We could send that using the invoke web request to the virtual center with the token that we've got back. And we could do the same thing. We could do a get on that /vCenter VM to return the list, convert it from its JSON format into a list of PowerShell objects, and then return them to the screen. Fairly straightforward stuff using 11 lines of code. But what we actually want to do is make this even easier for you to use with VMware. So we've converted this to 2 lines of code. And what we've got here on the screen is actually a Connect CIS server commandlet. So what this does is this connects you to the REST endpoint within Virtual Center. So all that stuff we did in our previous list of creating the session, making sure we're storing the token, reusing that token, is all handled by this Connect CIS server. You just run this commandlet in the way that you would normally run the Connect VI server, but the information you get back is from the REST API. So continuing on, we also have the Get CIS service commandlet. So why don't we first of all connect, and I'll show you what the Get CIS service commandlet does. First of all, we'll run the Get CIS service commandlet in itself. Now you can see instantly what this does is actually lists back all of the things that we can work with in that API. So all of the things that are currently in the REST API. And then we can narrow it down a little bit based upon that list to say, okay, we want to work with the /vCenter VM. Okay, we know we've got that service available to us, so why don't we put that in a variable and actually see what we can do with that service. If I use getMember, which I'm sure you've all used here before, but just as a reminder, that will give you all of the information about what we can actually do with this object. It will give us a nice list of the properties and the methods. Now, if we take a look at the methods, we can see something quite interesting. We can see exactly the same information that we just saw in our API Explorer. We can actually do that list, the get, the delete, and the create. Exactly the same stuff, just through PowerCLI. So if we take a look at that, what we can do is we can use that list and we can use it in the line above, as I'm doing, and call that list to list the virtual machines, and then select the areas that we want and format them out. So as you can see, there's two different ways that get you exactly the same information, but we've made it a lot easier to access this new REST API. And the reason I'm taking you through this right now is because the information that's in that REST API might be limited at the moment, but as I said, we are moving to that REST API and making sure that that REST API is where things are going. In fact, all the future functionality that we put in our API is only going to come out via the REST API. It's not going to be backported into the SOAP API. So I'm giving you a little bit of getting started stuff right now, and clearly we can go more advanced with this as you get more features in there. But just to go back on a couple of slides, one of the great things that's there already and only available via the REST API is the VAMI REST API, the VCSA appliance REST API. And William has already done a great job of using those commandlets I showed you a second ago, the Connect CIS server, the Get CIS service commandlets, to wrap them into a bunch of functions that allow you to work with the appliance API. So definitely check those out and start getting familiar with those. You're going to need them in the future.
Okay, this resting, you probably heard about it quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. And be sure, if you want to dive into REST and how you work with REST API, it's not only for your VMware environment or vSphere environment. REST is nowadays everywhere. And as a good example, we are going to show you some things we did with the VMDM community. So the graphs we have shown you earlier, they were all created by script, of course. We don't do manual work, neither of us. And we obtained all that data through REST API calls to the Jive. So the VMDM community is hosted on a Jive application. And luckily that has a REST interface as well. So in the past we had a method where we were going to simulate HTML or HTTP requests to that environment. That function is still on my website somewhere, but that's not the way you should do it, because every time they change the version, you have to review how these return packages are constructed, and you probably have to update. If you go via the REST API, it becomes a whole lot easier. So we have in PowerShell itself the invoke REST method, where we call the REST API from, in this case, the Jive application. And we have a script that now allows you to query the VMTN database. We have a small demo on that. So you know this, or should know this one. This is the PowerCLI community on the VMTN website. You can do search on the web page itself, but of course we wouldn't be us if we didn't try to automate this. So we have this small script here. We'll go into the functions in a minute. So what I'm doing here is I'm using this invoke REST method PowerShell commandlet to call the REST interface of the Jive application. I have several functions where you can find things, so everything is based on this REST API, but you can split it up. Also notice that we are using splitting in this case. The example we are going to run here is looking in the PowerCLI community. I'm looking for stuff that I contributed to that community and which contains the keyword OS customization spec. So we launch, and what we see here, because we had a start process at the end on the URLs, it opens a browser with those 3 hits that we found through the VMTN query. So that's what you see at the end there, the start process invokes the browser. So even our searching, first of all, uses REST APIs or can use REST APIs, and we can automate the acquisition of data in that VMTN environment. So quite useful, not to overdo it, because I think the administrators of the VM community might get cross if we do too much data in there. Again, the code for later on when you want to review what is happening there. The REST API, what we're using, so I just mark out a bit of the details. Another concept that we need to do, and that is quite useful if you're going into advanced scripting, is recursive walking through your directory tree. We have a small example in this demo here. What we're doing is we're looking at the permissions that you can set on several objects in your vSphere environment. Now, most of the time, in most of the environments, there's a lot of permissions that were given over time, so there are definitely duplicates in there. That means that you could have a permission on a higher level, which is repeated on a lower level. And in fact, the script that I wrote for this was triggered by a question in the VMTN community. A person wanted to clean that up, and I took it a bit further. So now I wrote a script which is going to recursively run through your tree structure, look at the permissions that are given on each node in there, and then eventually clean it up. First, we get the content of the permissions that it was before we run our script, so that produces a text file that we can later on compare to the results after the clean. So there's a number of permissions on there. We say on which folder, what user, and so on. Now we're going to do this optimize. I'm calling a function here. We're cleaning it up. Note that I'm doing this in the first instance with the what if switch on there. So these destructive kind of commandlets or functions, make sure that you have a security break in there. So first run them with the what if, that you at least can check what they are actually going to do if you run it without the what if. Just a bit of scrolling through the code. What you see here is in that line is I look if there are child objects. I'm going to call the function again on those child objects. And at the bottom here, this is done in Visual Studio Code. You see the results of the what if. So he tells us what he would be doing in our environment if we run the script without what if. Now, when you're sure, when you tested this, I mean really sure, because you're removing stuff here, you take away the what if, and now you run it again. He has no messages, so everything is fine in PowerShell world. Now we do again a post report. Remember we did a pre-report earlier. We have another text file with what is now available as permissions on the environment. And one of the nice features of the Visual Studio Code editor that we're using is that you have many extensions. One of these extensions is where you can take diffs between 2 files. So I open the 2 files, I mark the first one, that is the pre, I mark the second one, that is the diff, and he will show me, GitHub style, what is missing in the second file. So you can see that we went from quite a bit, I think 30-something permissions, for 13 to 18, so we did a bit of cleanup in our environment. So recursive functions quite interesting. You want to go that step advanced. Again, this is what I showed you earlier. You have the child entities. If there are child entities, call the same function again to list the permissions on there. So the what if, we mentioned that as well. What if is easy to implement in your own functions. It's built in. You just have to specify this support should process at the top and then foresee at the bottom here what he should do when people are using a what if switch on your commandlet. Now, something that is quite interesting and which was introduced by Jake is a site where people can submit questions or remarks or desires for PowerCLI. This is the URL. I think you will see it in a lot of other sessions. Now, one of the suggestions in there is that somebody wanted support for Python with the invoke VM script commandlet. At the moment, you can only do it with, you can only use scripts versus Linux guest OSs. So I said, this must be doable at the moment without a problem, without waiting for the dev team to change something. So I threw together a quick script. First of all, we see more and more open environments, so people are running Linux in equal amounts as they are running. So my test is done on an Ubuntu box, but it could be whatever box, Linux box I mean. Sorry. So I'm looking at the standard invocation of invoke VM script. If you look, splatting again. So we specify the code that's just echo hello world there as an inline string. When we run this, okay, this is what the echo returns from our guest OS. Now in Unix, in Linux, you have something that they call the shebang, where you can inside the script on your first line indicate what interpreter should be handling your script. Would that work if I say this script should be handled by the bash interpreter? When I run this, we'll see, oops, nothing there. Now, this is a problem, or this is not a problem. This is caused because the way they use the current invoke VM script method. They always invoke this through a specific encoded way via a bash process. Now, when I do it in my way, with my function does return. So I can use, in this case, I indicate via the shebang that it should be using bash, and it echoes my string. But can it do other stuff? Because the shebang is there for multiple languages. So let's try it with the Python script. When I run this, those lines, I get again the result. So even my Python script is now working. And there's a few others that you can do this way. Perl, for example. And you again see that he will run this, return the result, and if you look at the code, it's all managed through this shebang that I put in that code. JavaScript will work. Again, we have the happy 10th birthday. We have, again, the shebang for the Node.js. It continues like that. We have PHP, we have Lua. The only thing I couldn't get working till now is Ruby, because he has a very specific way of intercepting the arguments that you pass to a function the way I use them. In short, what I'm doing, I'm your guest operations manager, the same thing that invoke VM script is doing. This is from the new documentation environment, this method, managed object, sorry, and the methods are to be found in there. I use this shebang feature, like I said, that's this first line you put in your indicate which interpreter should be handling the code that follows. For your reference later on, this is my internal flow that I used in my function, but I will publish the function in the coming days on my blog, and you can have a look at your heart's desire. So again, these are the different methods from the guest operations that I'm using. List process. Getting the result and transferring the text file is done via an invoke web request, so very straightforward. And we finally
Yeah, well, what I found interesting about that entire section just then is that didn't exist in us session. So this is how dedicated Luke is in between Vegas and here. He's actually added that entire section and that demonstration. And not only has he done that, he's actually looked at the community site that Jake put together. This is a site that you can go to and raise questions and vote on features to go in there. So it looks like Luke has now got a new information to build his own scripts from as well. So thanks, Luke.
I have my own little black book now.
So some of the takeaways, I mean, the takeaways are pretty obvious, right? PowerCLI has come a long way, and this is all with your help as well. Without you guys telling us what you want in there or where we should go next, we wouldn't have come to where we are, and we're certainly looking forward to the next 10 years. The community, as we've shown, just grows from strength to strength to strength. You're answering questions fast, apart from that 1,009 days, you know, come on guys, let's do something there. And, you know, it really is about the community. This is what keeps me involved in the product. PowerCLI is definitely here to stay and has a bright future. It has a fantastic product manager now who is taking this places to amazing places. Everything is awesome. So I want to thank today's session. I do want to ask you to please fill out the surveys. Luke and I do have a look at the surveys. We read the information in there. I don't mind the comments about the accents. We don't generally get those in Europe. We definitely get those in the US though,
yep,
right?
Yep.
Me a little less now. So please do add your comment. Tell us what you want us to talk about next year. And remember, you don't have to wait for VMworld to now raise a feature. You can go to vmwa.re/PowerCLI and you can raise a feature for us to work on, or you can take a look and vote them up and down. It really is a great site to get back involved and communicating with us. Fill out your survey and give us those comments back, please. Tell us what we need to do next year to get you in this same room. And thank you again for coming back and listening to us both. We really do enjoy it.
Thank you. Question.
So we do have 2 minutes left for questions. Please do raise your hand and we'll get somebody with a microphone over to you to ask those questions.
Otherwise, just address us in the corridor or wherever you see us.
Sorry.
Is there a question?
Is it working now? No.
No. Now it is.
No. Okay.
Yay.
So I hope the question is not too dumb. Do you plan on like doing anything VMware based as an alternative to the ISE Windows PowerShell, or is there no plans to? So you just want to continue?
An alternative to what? Sorry.
Excuse me?
An alternative to?
To the PowerShell ICE.
Oh, the ISE?
Yes.
Oh, okay, the editor? No, we definitely don't plan on doing anything like that at VMware. I think the community has a couple of great options there. It is fantastic, but if you haven't checked out VMware Code, Luke was using it in some of his demos here. VMware Code? Visual Studio Code, excuse me. Check out Visual Studio Code. It's a free downloadable ISE, and it allows you to add multiple plugins in there for PowerShell. I've certainly switched to it if I use it, mainly because it works on the Mac and Linux and Windows, and it has some really great features in there. I don't think it would make sense for VMware to bring out their own, because really that's the one that's free and the community's gathering around that. So we might build on that for sure. Yeah. Good question, thank you. Any other questions?
Nope. We must have been clear.
Yeah. Thanks again for attending our session, guys.
Intimidated by the keynote speaker.